Okay, thank you very much for coming. Yeah, I'm the support act, so lots of exciting stuff to come after me as well, so hope I don't bore you too much. But no, this is a topic that I've been looking at in several roles across the last few years of my career. So it's no doubt something that the developers amongst you will have an appreciation of, and maybe if there's team leads and stuff, they might also have seen some of the issues that you get when trying to be agile and maybe in a regulated environment. So just want to sort of start off, what problem do we have? So like in the past, we always used to just install the tools we needed for the job, and that was that. Surely that's fine. But each project that you come to, that might be fine if you're just working on one project day to day all the time. But each project has its own specific needs, technologies and tools. Moving between projects can be pretty hard, and something like a consultancy like NewRedo, we really value being able to switch quickly between projects and hence tool change, tool sets, and all of that. And we have more tools and supporting services in projects than ever before. Like it used to be like you have Java, you have your database, and that's about it. But now we've got message queues and obviously still your databases and who maybe several microservices and a front end application. So there's a lot more complex than it maybe used to be. And also we want to be able to experiment, and that means more tools to install. And how do we keep track? How do we keep track of all those tools? And this is like particularly a problem if you're in like a regulated industry. Your organisation may or may not fit into that category, but as cybersecurity concerns increase, organisations become more aware of needing to know what software is installed on people's PCs and whatnot, and that becomes quite hard. And I've been in organisations that have really tried to lock that down, so that developers, in IT security's mind, developers shouldn't have permissions to just install whatever they want. And obviously, so there's some competing priorities there from developers wanting to experiment and do the job with their tools of choice, and then sort of IT security coming in and wanting reports on wanting to know that only official software has been installed. And standards such as like ISO 9001, ISO 27001, that sort of reinforces that requirement to understand what's installed in your device estate. And unfortunately, that can lead to shadow IT, where users learn the ways to get around all the restrictions just to get their jobs done, and that doesn't really help anyone in the long run. So, is there another way? Well, I hope so, because that's why I'm here, right? But in order to decide which way might be right, there's a lot of things to consider, and I guess this is the challenge in any software solution, really. So we want to know. It depends on a number of factors. So for starters, I put where will it run. So like you might need to run your environment in a corporate network that's fully firewalled from the internet, doesn't have generous internet access or whatever. You might need to run it on a local laptop or a PC that's in the office. You might use your favourite web browser. I don't know if that's meant anything to anyone. Or it might run in, believe me, this is a cloud. It's the best picture I could get. It's a bit rubbish. So like you might be able to run in the cloud. You might not be able to. You might have to run in a restricted environment like a web browser. Or and another factor, and this differs a lot based on what sort of platform you're developing. So you might be running on Windows, developing on Windows, .NET things. That's typical. for .NET. So you might have a Mac environment, or you might be able to, you might be using Linux, and then that has its own challenges about figuring out what's installed and what isn't. Whereas, I guess the Windows estate is a lot more geared towards auditability of what packages you've got installed. And then developers, they want choice. They want to use their own editors. They might be using Visual Studio. They might want VS Code. They might hate VS Code. I know some of mine do. They might like Vim. Yeah. Any Vim users out there? Yeah. There we go. The true editor, I guess you say. Yeah. There's a lot of factors to consider, and it can be quite tricky to figure out. You want a project with its tools and things, and you want developers to be able to get started quickly, to be able to switch between projects. How can we do that? Okay, so one tool that's around at the moment, I'll start from the beginning. The traditional way, if you will, of solving the problem, particularly from a language point of view, is to have a manager for the installation of your compiler or your interpreter. So RBM for Ruby, MVM maybe for Node. You've got SDK man for the JVM languages, and RustUp is apparently Rust's tool of choice. And then, so that's all very language specific. And so you can't manage things like databases and, your message buses and things like that. So enter ASDF, which has it's got a plugin architecture, so you can specify a load of different tools in a tools.versions file, and you can just go in and install the things you want. This could be shared between developers and CI systems to make sure you've got a consistent environment, but it doesn't really address the auditability problem that we maybe have or maybe don't. So if you want to make sure that only those tools are installed on someone's system. So, that might be something you consider. Another thing I've tried, if your developers are happy to use a browser-based editor, is GitHub Codespaces or Gitpod or Amazon's Cloud9. They're editors that run in a cloud environment, so you can have a base image that can be created with all the tools in it, and then you run it in the cloud, which may or may not be suitable because that might please IT security that none of this dirty stuff is running in their network. But then if you actually need to access things in the corporate network, then that could be a problem. Also, running IDEs in the browser is hit and miss, I guess. Goes back to developers' choice. They might not like using VS Code. They might not like, they're pretty guaranteed not to like Cloud9 if you've ever used it. It's rubbish. You may have some mileage with that. You may not. Also, one thing I've tried before. We'll get onto VS Code, but they have a remote development extension which you can SSH into a remote machine and do your development there. But again, it requires you to use VS Code, which not everyone's happy with. So one thing that I'm quite keen on at the moment, NIX. So you may not have heard of it, so apologies. NIX is a GNU Linux package manager. Right, but it's also a language. But it's a package manager that rethinks how traditional Linux distributions install packages. So it's meant to be a declarative way to configure your system. It uses a content addressable file system to store versions of packages, so you can have multiple versions of the same package on your system, but not necessarily in use at once. And users can set up the combinations that they need. As I said, it's also a language used to configure this. So a functional language, a bit esoteric, focused on the task of managing, building and installing packages. So, that's good, but it's something new to learn, I guess. And its functional nature allows for the decomposition of your environment into separate files, and then they can be, they themselves can be versioned, and they're called flakes. But this obviously is a Linux-specific solution. It's been ported to macOS and WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux. So it might be suitable for your environment. or it might not be. I mean, it's, it's a you have to assess that for your environment. Okay, so that's a very, very quick overview of NIX. But and then there's obviously Docker. So Roy had alluded to this earlier. Docker can be used to package up applications and environments. Many thousands of applications already available as Docker images, and of course they can be extended and used like VMs basically for a consistent development environment. They're not without their issues. They've got like a single inheritance model of Docker files, which can make it quite awkward if you want to install like a different set of tools in the same container. So you might choose a base image that's like Node, and then you discover you need Python, so you need to go and figure out how to do the installer for Python as well, and it gets quite big. So you have to install you choose one base and then you choose install all the other bits manually. Also, the best practices for these tool installers can change. So you might not know that until recently, like Terraform, HashiCorp didn't have a Debian apt package for ARM64 builds of Terraform. That's obviously having a Mac was very apparent to me. But yeah, so that meant as a Mac user I had to change all the container builds to not use the deb packages, just to download the binary and store that into my container. But now it's changed, so there now is an ARM64 build of that. So I had to go back and change everything. So there's not really a good way of sort of having a modular build of a Docker container using the Docker file. But the benefit of this is that in a corporate environment, you can bless Docker containers. You can sign them, and you can tell users that they're only allowed to run signed Docker images. So actually, it could be part of a solution. Right. So this apparently is a very boring logo for dev containers. So I spoke about Visual Studio earlier with their remote development tools. So it's really cool. Like you can spin up a Docker container, and then Visual Studio will go and install an agent, a server inside your Docker container, and then you can use your editor that's installed on your local machine, and then but edit files inside the container and run things in the container, and that's pretty cool. Furthermore, that container could be running on a remote machine, so you could SSH to a remote machine, open up Visual Studio, run your stuff on there, and then you can attach to a container that's running on that SSH connection. So there's quite a lot of possibilities if your users are happy using VS Code, and I think it's a spec that Microsoft are pushing hard. They're integrating it into GitHub Workspaces, Code Spaces, sorry, and other tools are sort of picking it up. There's some support in the JetBrains project products, but I'm not quite sure how integrated that is yet. There is a big problem that I have with the dev container spec. However, there's this thing called features, which is meant to address this problem of having modular bits put into your Docker file, but to me it just seems the wrong way to do it, because it's going back to the procedural way of setting up environments. So I don't really like that. But the dev container spec eases some cross-platform headaches. It sets up your SSH keys and your GPG agent. You can download your doc files from a remote repository, and so that might be suitable for your team, and it does make things easier. But as I say, it depends on you using a particular editor. There is a CLI, I guess, so you could have your tool and install it in a container, and then like if you're using Vim, you could go in, you could have Vim in your container, and then everyone's happy, I guess. But I think because it's a standard that's supported by Microsoft, it will get better support over time. However, I do still have the problem with Docker files. So my current thinking, right, and this is what I really want to try for our team, is that since most containers are Linux based, you can have NIX configure your Linux machine, okay? And so if you're using Docker build kit, you can even get rid of your Docker file, just build your container directly from a NIX expression. I've done that. That's pretty cool. It means you can have the current best practice installation procedures in a Git repository and just sort of mix and match them, and that's perfect for a dev container. And so this is how I plan to approach environment builds in the future, but it does require that people using the containers understand the NIX language, which isn't totally straightforward. So obviously this would have to be introduced gradually if we did that. But yeah, and again, so this very much depends on your environment. So I think this will work for us. As we said, there's lots of considerations to what would work for you. The operating system being one of the main ones. And so yeah, that's my current thinking on how to manage development environments, with a little bit of talk about regulations. So yeah, thank you. There we go.